Member Gill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Commissioner. Mr. Good, I have a few questions that hopefully go quickly, and then I have a few questions that regrettably are pretty complex. Let's try to get the easy ones out of the way first. I'm not sure that this commission has, up to the date, had evidence regarding the extent to which DFO own licenses within each license area. And if I'm in error about this, or Commission Counsel stands up and says it's all before the record, then obviously I'll pass on it. For example, with my clients, Area B, there are a number of B licenses, and I'm informed, and please confirm this, that 26 of the Area B licenses are owned by the federal government, by the Department of Fisheries. Is that approximately correct?
I'd be willing to agree to approximate numbers. I know the numbers have been changing, and there's ongoing buybacks as part of the Pacific Integrated Commercial Fisheries Initiative.
And I think it's important for the record to have this information provided for all of the areas. And if you don't have it at your fingertips, maybe I could ask that you provide it to Commission Counsel, and with agreement it would go in, obviously, through Mr. Timberg's agreement.
Let's table that suggestion. We have a witness who will be appearing on commercial licensing. That may be the appropriate venue. I'd suggest we set that aside, and we'll speak with counsel about that.
All right. But you would agree with me that there is a significant ownership by DFO in certain license areas, not only Area B, but for example, my client Area D?
The department does own a number of Area D licenses.
And then we get into this complex subject, and again, time is so short, and I don't know how to deal with these things. When the government of Canada owns these licenses, and let's focus on Area B, you do not, the department, DFO, do not require the operator of that license to fish within Area D. It is transferable, because you are the government, to other areas, including the inland fishery.
For the licenses that the department has in its inventory, these are primarily from the Allocation Transfer Program and the Pacific Integrated Commercial Fisheries Initiative. The licenses can be provided to groups to fish the actual license and the associated conditions with that.
Yes.
For inland demonstration fisheries, we've been using those licenses. For example, inland demonstration fisheries in the Fraser, we'd be using the share of Fraser sockeye associated with an Area B license, for example, to support the shares provided for the inland demonstration fishery. Those inland fisheries would be licensed under the Aboriginal Communal ACFLR fishery license regulations.
Right. So, as if we didn't have enough complexity with all the issues today, we have the added complexity that with, for example, Area D licenses, some Area D licenses are actually utilized, or their harvest is utilized in areas other than Area D or Area B.
That's correct.
And only the government has, obviously, that luxury or legal right to do so.
The department, I think I explained, has been providing licenses under the Aboriginal Communal Fisheries License Regulations for any shares we're providing, in which case when we're doing that, the licenses in inventory are not being fished by other groups.
Right. So there are,
at the same time.
I'm sorry. So there are there are a number of licenses that are really in cold storage that are owned by DFO that aren't at this moment having an associated harvest to them.
No, I don't think that's entirely correct the way you've stated that. The licenses in the DFO inventory have been used to support demonstration fisheries in inland areas. For Fraser sockeye, we've attributed the shares of Fraser sockeye for each of the Area B, D, E, and H licenses is the case from last year to shares for these inland projects. So in essence, we're using the shares from those licenses to provide for similar shares in the inland demonstration fisheries.
All right, thank you. I may be coming back to that in a few minutes. I want to deal with another fairly simple matter, which is native involvement in the commercial fishery. Now, at the start of your testimony, you did speak to the fact that you felt one of the deficiencies or shortcomings of the PPR for the commercial fishery was that it didn't highlight or profile the commercial native involvement, correct?
Yes, I did. In working towards the integrated fishery, the First Nations are an important component of that.
And I consulted with Commission Counsel early this morning about the fact that you were with the understanding that this would be covered later on in the inquiry. Is that correct?
Well, I understand there's the First Nations panel coming up later.
Yes, but I understand, if I understood Mr. Martland correctly, that we may not be getting certain evidence that is of interest to me, and I want to ask you a series of questions unless Mr. Martland feels that, with confidence, that this will come out later. I would like to know if you have information regarding the extent to which First Nation people are participating in the commercial fishery either as license holders or as operators, deckhands. What is their involvement in the commercial fishery? And I know you won't have the figures necessarily.
I can speak in general terms as to where the involvement is. In terms of commercial licenses, there are First Nations that have A licenses, which are the regular commercial licenses. There's some of those that may be reduced fee category of those licenses. We also have communal F category licenses provided to First Nations as well on a communal basis. We have an N category, which is for the Northern Native Fishing Corporation. These are gillnet licenses in areas C, D, and E. We have licenses, in terms of other involvement, we have economic opportunity fisheries in the Fraser River with Musqueam and Tawasin. The Tawasin fishery is part of the treaty agreement and are part of our harvest agreement associated with the treaty that provides for commercial access. We also have demonstration fisheries utilizing licenses in the department's inventory, as we've just been discussing.
Can you inform me, even through your counsel, is there a document within the DFO that could be filed to this tribunal so we don't spend a lot of time in hearing, but where that document will convey to the commissioner the extent to which First Nations people are involved in the fishery, either as license holders or laboring as operators or laboring as deckhands for other operators? Do you know of such a document?
I'm not aware of a specific one that I have off the top of my head. There may be that information that could be pulled together. It might be multiple sources. Certainly in terms of the license information for some of the A, F, and N licenses, we could provide that relatively quickly, I would think. We could probably also provide a summary of the licenses the department holds in its inventory.
And what about numbers of First Nations people that are not license holders but are laboring as operators or deckhands?
I'm not aware of the specific information around that.
I wondered if I could request of the Commission that the Government of Canada DFO provide that information to this Commission through a filed document through Mr. Timberg in due course.
With respect, Mr. Commissioner, I am concerned that we're doing sort of a document discovery through a witness process. I'm happy to receive requests, but I suggest that it may make some sense for us to have that conversation and we can respond to the request that's put forward. We have a witness on licensing insofar as that's the topic, and it may be that we can put these things together. I don't have a difficulty with Mr. Rosenblum asking if there's a particular document. It's not one he's identified or that we've led whether such a document exists. But I think going further and making a request goes beyond what's appropriate. Mr. Timberg was also rising, I saw.
Yes, Mr. Commissioner, the ordinary process has been that participants write to Commission counsel for any requests with regarding information or documents, and the Commission then handles those requests and then works to work with the other participants. So this is a new strategy that Mr. Rosenblum is employing here, asking a witness for a DFO to produce documents. In the ordinary course, he'd go through the Commission Council. The Commission Council would handle that. I understand there is going to be an Aboriginal fishing panel for a week or so. It's coming up in May, and I myself don't have any knowledge about that. I'm not responsible for it. Perhaps Commission Council could enlighten us as to what's coming, but I can't assist in that regard. So I think this may be duplicating efforts that are happening behind the scenes while people are preparing to bring all of the relevant evidence forward.
If I understood Mr. Martland correctly before our morning session, the panel that you speak of, Mr. Timberg, is unlikely to be speaking to the commercial fishery component of First Nations involvement in the fishery, and that is why I'm asking these questions and simply want to document. I don't want to waste a lot of time. If the Commission wants a letter from me making this request, I'm happy to do it that way. I just think the information should be for the Commission. Thank you. If I may move on. Am I correct, sir, that you are the DFO chair of the IHPC?
Yes, I've had that role for approximately 1 year. Prior to that, the salmon team lead, Mr. Paul Ryle, was chairing that committee.
And would you agree with me that over your time and what you know of the past, that there really have been only 2 occasions where there has been a consensus reached at the IHPC, and one related to the waiver of license fees, and the other related to assisting certain parties in terms of their participation, cost of participation, harvest committees, and in the IHPC?
I do recall those. There may have been some others as well. I seem to recall one about early Stuart sockeye.
Okay. And you would agree with me that in respect to those 2, that both those matters, although consensus was reached, unfortunately reached a cinder block wall. They never did get implemented because of DFO decisions back east.
The Integrated Harvest Planning Committee is providing advice to the department, in that case in the form of consensus recommendations, and then the department responds to those.
Yes, and you're aware that in the particular examples we are speaking of, both the waiver of license fee during non-fishing seasons, and in connection with the question of funding the harvesters at some of these meetings, that there was consensus reached on both occasions, but the DFO did not act on either of them. Do you agree with that?
Well, in terms of the license review, we did proceed with a follow-up meeting with the Commercial Salmon Advisory Board, and part of our response in terms of the salmon fishery was that work was ongoing, led by nationally from Ottawa on a national license fee review, and that any measures would be part of that process. And we had Mr. Robert Elliott, I believe, come to or connect by conference to the Commercial Salmon Advisory Board to discuss some of the directions that are being considered there.
But Mr. Grout, I don't in any way want to be disrespectful to you, but is it not correct that on both those occasions where consensus was reached, neither case did DFO act upon it and implement what was the consensus decision of the IHPC? Yes or no?
In those 2 examples, we did not.
We have been talking over the last few days about selective fishing. Firstly, no mention is ever made of selective fishing initiatives done outside of British Columbia, be it our Atlantic or foreign selective fishing tests. Is there a reason for that? Is it because the species are so different that when you're carrying out studies here, test fisheries here in BC with our Pacific sockeye, that there are no equivalents in Norway or Norway or Scotland or anywhere else that would be of any assistance? I've not heard any mention of gleaning any information from another jurisdiction.
I'm not an expert on that specific information, so that's why I haven't provided it.
Thank you.
Mr. Commissioner, just to clarify the record, Dr. Hargraves did speak about work that was happening on selective fishing in the Columbia River and spoke about work that he was doing with them.
Thank you. When you've been discussing share-based management, I want to focus for a moment, and this gets complex, and forgive me if I'm not delivering this question in a way that you're understanding. I want to talk about the transfers upriver on a share-based management concept. Are there not complexities in making a fair calculation for the accounting of the transfers upriver of a license that DFO owns?
If you're asking if it's complex, I would agree.
That was the easy answer. Yes, and can you just explain in as simple way as possible why you're faced with that complexity? What is that challenge to you in dealing with that issue?
Well, the department is committed to a fair and open process for providing for those transfers. We don't have the specific framework for how that should occur between all of the existing commercial fisheries or inland First Nation fisheries. So but that said, we've also wanted to explore demonstrations in inland areas. So we've tried to take an approach where we recognize that those harvests in inland areas should be associated with a share that's been transferred from the commercial fishery, in this case through one of the department's programs to purchase that license. We've provided for the licenses that are held by the department to be valued on an equal basis in terms of a percentage share. Providing those shares as a percentage of the commercial TAC has been another element. So it's not a fixed entitlement to a number of pieces, but it's a percentage reflecting the variations in the total allowable catch. And I think the final piece is looking at what those shares would be worth in more terminal areas where not all of the stocks are present, or subsets of the stocks are present compared to marine areas. And so we've provided a framework where we've essentially treated a license as or an Area B license, for example, as a component of, or includes all of the stocks of Fraser sockeye that might be harvested in a marine area. And we've tried to demonstrate how the shares that we're providing in inland areas are not exceeding the relative shares of those individual stocks in the inland areas when we provide those shares. And we have been working pretty closely with the Fraser River panel, including the Canadian members on that panel, to try and explain and show them with facts and figures how that relatively complex accounting can work. And certainly there's challenges around explaining how the transfers work. I think there's some acknowledgement that the general rules that we're using to do that are acceptable. They're consistent with some of the direction we've seen from the SCORE report, where there was agreement between the groups.
But in the course of that process, it can be to the prejudice of the commercial fleet out in the marine area, can it not?
You'll have to provide a more specific
All right.
question.
I'll pass on that. Now, Mr. Heiswick, I believe, will be asking you more questions in regards to this business of in-river transfer, so I'll leave that to his capable hands. Lastly, again, something very complex. As I understand it, on the selective fishery, you base your enforcement or application of fishery techniques on a formula that is based upon an enumeration. In other words, when it comes to bycatch, you have a model that you apply, and you assume that on a certain catch there will be a certain amount of bycatch as a portion of the catch that a boat may recover, correct?
To be more specific, I think what you're referring to was some of my testimony regarding how we account for impacts on interior Fraser coho relative to our 3% exploitation objective.
Yes.
We're rather than using a specific catch quantum to do that, we're looking at effort in terms of number of boat days or number of sets or amount of time fishing in the fishery relative to a historical period to try and assess the exploitation on the population. So
Right.
we're not using catch specifically there.
Right. So it could be a situation where a boat has, in fact, no bycatch of interior coho, but it will be burdened with the regulations because your model says that historically there'd be a certain percentage of that bycatch. Correct?
Yeah, that's one of the downsides of using that sort of approach.
Yes. And is it not also a downside if indeed you are not satisfied that there is there's an accurate stock enumeration that is taking place in connection with such a fishery? In other
I'm
words,
not
are
sure
you comfortable with using models in the context of a stock enumeration that you might not believe is effective?
Well, maybe the way to answer this is when you're using a model, you're making a number of assumptions, and to the extent that those assumptions are valid and correct, your model results can be reliable. So to the extent that we haven't had some information for some time, or there's a need to verify components of the model, that can decrease your confidence in the model outputs.
Yes, and would you agree with me that the current state of affairs, you are not confident with that model, that your enumeration is not effective enough to give you confidence in that model?
Well, you keep referring to enumeration, which for me, enumeration means accounting of a specific number. So in the coho approach that we're using, we're looking at the effort in fisheries today relative to efforts in the past and associated exploitation rates in that past period. So really what we're using to manage today is the amount of effort compared to that base period. So we're not relying on specific counts, as you've stated, of the number of coho that might be encountered by any individual vessel.
Could you imagine the system being more effectively managed in terms of bycatch, where there'd be more confidence in the figures?
Well, there's different ways you could do it, which would likely entail additional assessment resources. So if you were able to confidently assess for example, the run size of interior Fraser coho in a way similar or in a similar fashion to what we do for Fraser sockeye, you might be able to envision a program where you could then calculate what quantum of fish is associated with a 3% exploitation rate and manage the fishery on that basis. That's the information that's currently lacking, though. We don't have the information currently to do that.
Precisely, and that would cost money, wouldn't it?
That's correct.
Thank you. No further questions.
Mr. Commissioner, in terms of the sequence of examination, by agreement, Mr. Harvey and Mr. Eidsvik have switched orders, so Mr. Harvey will be next, please.
Mr. Grout, Chris Harvey for the Area G Association and the United Fishermen Allied Workers Union. I would like to cover two areas with you. Firstly, the effectiveness of consultation And what I will be addressing there is the widespread perception amongst fishermen that responsibility is downloaded without the decision-making power being downloaded, and that results in an ineffective situation. The second point I wish to cover with you relates to ITQs, and I'll start with that one. The impression I've received from your evidence is that DFO is on a mission to effectively force ITQs on the industry in spite of obvious adverse socioeconomic impacts. I think you have agreed as much as to say that it is the DFO policy to move towards ITQs throughout the industry?
No, I wouldn't say that's accurate. I'd say as part of the vision for Pacific Fisheries Reform, we're looking at share-based management as one of the directions that can go. We're looking currently with implementing that direction with willing fleets and exploring it through demonstrations. ITQs are one of the potential options that might be explored down that particular path.
You refer to traditional style of fishery as a derby fishery, is that correct?
Yes.
That expression, is that taken from the use of the word derby in the context of a sports fishing derby?
I'm not entirely sure of the origin of the word or the use in this context.
It's not a traditional word used in fisheries management, is it?
I've heard it used regularly.
All right. In a sports fishing derby, a sports fishing derby is where a number of boats go out, small boats, sports fishing, and the winner is the fisherman who catches the largest fish. That's what you understand a sports fishing derby to be?
In some cases, I understand they can have prizes for different categories of fish that might be caught.
Sports fishing derbies are all sports fishing for Chinook and coho, at any rate, are based on individual quotas, are they not?
In the recreational fishery, there are regulations which restrict how many fish may be harvested. In the case of Chinook, would be 2 per day usually.
Two per day. And that individual quota of 2 per day gives rise to a well-known incentive to high grade. In other words, temptation on the fishermen to throw away the small ones and keep the big ones.
And what's the? Can you rephrase your question?
Well, I mean, is it well known that there's a risk in a quota such as that, which is often referred to as high grading? In other words, discarding the smaller fish or less desirable fish and keeping the more desirable fish.
If you're asking me if I would identify that as a potential concern, yes, that's something that's been raised.
And that concern is also raised with respect to ITQs in commercial fisheries, correct?
I've heard that raised as a potential concern, yes.
And the department meets that by requiring electronic monitoring in some areas and the other surveillance mechanisms that you've described, such as on-vessel monitors or shore-based monitors, correct?
In the salmon fishery, the use of electronic monitoring is not widespread. That's more of a tool that's used in the ground fishery. We are looking at, or we do our service providers do validation of the catches when they're landed.
what I found somewhat extraordinary, and I invite you to comment on it, looking through the documents that have been produced, is that there's no, at least I wasn't able to find any reliable socioeconomic analysis of the effects of an ITQ system in the commercial fishery. Now, I know you've referred to the American study, Exhibit 481, and perhaps we could just have that brought up for a moment.
Excuse me, Mr. Harvey, which tab was that, please?
I don't think I've got a note of the tab number. It's the document entitled Sustaining America's Fisheries and Fishing Communities. It was the document that was first referred to this morning. Mr. Lund, could we bring up 481 on the screen?
Thank you.
Now the first clue I'd suggest that's got very little to do with the BC fishery is that that's not a BC fishing boat on the cover, is it?
I don't know where the origin of that boat is from.
We don't see boats like that on the BC coast, do you?
Not usually, no.
And if turning over the page, it appears this analysis was written by Lawrence J. White, who's mentioned there, New York University, Deputy Chair of Stern's Economic Department, etc. You'd agree with me that this is a U.S. study?
Yes, that's the contributing partners.
And it starts off in the next page or 2 pages in the executive summary dealing with the there it is, the current state of America's fisheries. Now this document doesn't clearly indicate what the comparator is for ITQs, does it?
Well, in this case, they were looking at comparisons of these fisheries before and after implementation of a share-based approach.
And we know very little about the fisheries before because they're American fisheries and in some cases New Zealand fisheries that are discussed in this document. Is that a...
Yeah, there is the British Columbia groundfish trawl individual vessel quota program referred to as well.
Do you consider that to be a reliable assessment of that program?
I'm certainly not an expert on the assessment of the groundfish
Right.
program.
Is there a reason why the DFO has not done its own study of socioeconomic impacts of ITQs?
In terms of the demonstration fisheries we've done for salmon, we've tried to include elements of that in the some of the subsequent reviews of those demonstration projects that have been done.
I'm talking about a long-term analysis. Perhaps I'll ask you to look at a document that's in the provinces. Have you got the provinces book of documents there in front of you? Tab. The provinces book of documents, tab 10. Yes, which is on the screen now. It's entitled Pacific Commercial Fishing Fleet Financial Profiles for 2007. Prepared for Fisheries and Oceans by Stuart Nelson of Nelson Brother Fisheries. I'd like to ask you to look at page 50. Which which has a section dealing with ITQs. They're called IVQs in this document in the halibut fishery. Now that's a fishery that's had individual transferable quotas for in excess of 15 years, I think. Is that correct?
I couldn't speak to how long the program's been in place in that fishery.
And some of the implications in socioeconomic terms are set out. For example, under licensing profile on this page, the document states that a key feature of the halibut fleet is rationalization that has occurred since implementation of the IVQ system. While there are 428 licenses issued, only 181 vessels recorded landings in 2007. Now that's an indication, is it not, of the reduction in vessels and the reduction in employment that has resulted from the ITQ system in this fishery?
I don't think I would draw that conclusion. We've seen in the salmon fishery that in any given year, a large number of the vessels in each of the salmon fleets may also not record any landings. So you can see this phenomenon in both IVQ fisheries, as in this case you brought my attention to here, but you also see it in the salmon fleets that are competitive fisheries where we're not putting individual limits on harvest in place.
Yes, but the salmon fleets that are on a competitive basis, the inactive licenses in those fleets are not deriving any income, are they?
Well, in salmon, there may be cases where they may not be deriving income from a salmon license, but there's also other licenses that can be held on those vessels that they may derive their income from as well.
Yes, but my point is the inactive halibut licenses under this quota regime would be deriving income from the halibut fishery, even though there's no participation in the fishery. Because they'd be leasing their quotas to active fishing vessels.
You're making an assumption which I don't have any evidence in front of me to speak to.
Well, you see, that's the problem I have with your evidence, is that it seems to be based on a lack of evidence and a lack of data. If you look through this, and I'll just touch upon some of the elements at page 52. Just above the heading financial profiles, there are two bullet points. The second bullet point there reads, within the active L fleet, 168 of the 396 vessels, landings are highly skewed, with the top 33% of the vessels harvesting 59% of the fish and the bottom 33 landing only 10%. Underlying this landings pattern is the acquisition of quota by these vessels, either via purchase or through annual or long-term leases. Quota acquisition brings a financial burden. Examples are shown in the following section. Would you agree with that?
I would agree that that statement is consistent with my understanding of what can happen.
Yes. And then further down the page under financial profiles, the fourth bullet point there reads that 30% of the halibut landed by each vessel is assumed to be leased fish, for which a fee of $3 per pound was paid. Other ground fish is leased in the same percentage, etc. And then it mentions in the next bullet point, crews receive 40% of the net value of the catch after variable expenses are deducted. That would be after the lease expenses are deducted as well. Is that as you would understand it?
Again, you're asking me to verify specific evidence being provided by Mr. Nelson here. I can't confirm or report otherwise on what he's reported here.
But is this not a typical pattern of what happens after ITQ systems run for a number of years? That the number of vessels is run down, the cost for the active vessels increases because they've got a significant a quota leasing cost, and the income to the crews is significantly diminished. Is that not the inevitable consequence of an ITQ system?
I think you've asked a number of points there. Could you maybe just do them one at a time for me?
All right, I'll take them point by point. I'm asking, are these not the inevitable consequences of an ITQ system? First, a significant reduction in the number of active vessels.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily agree with the term significant, but you tend to see, or you can see, a reduction in the number of vessels that are fishing potentially.
Yes. And a related reduction in the employment.
I would characterize it as changes in the employment from, if you're comparing it to a competitive fishery where you have to go out as a license holder to access fish, you're going to need crew. Those openings tend to be shorter. In an ITQ style arrangement, the employment for the boats that are going out tends to be for longer openings. So there may be, if you're asking for the net change, I think it can vary with the example of the various fisheries.
Does the DFO not have any analysis, any statistics relating to the loss of employment consequent upon ITQ systems?
Your question is broadly for any fishery?
Yes.
There may be such documents. Off the top of my head, can't provide you one at this point.
Is another one of the inevitable consequences that there's a centralization or consolidation of the fishery to the disadvantage of coastal communities?
On the information I've seen, it's been hard to predict specifically which communities will be more affected than others.
Is another inevitable consequence that the income of the crew of the vessels is reduced because the lease costs are paid out first before the crew receive anything?
I don't have specific figures I can give you to answer that question.
Mr. Harvey, would this be a good point to take a break?
Oh, yes.
Hearing is now adjourned until 2 p.m.